3 days after Martha was lowered into the frozen Chicago ground, Arthur Vance sat paralyzed before her empty armchair, allowing the suffocating silence to consume his home. He found himself trapped in a loop, replaying the bleak funeral service where his daughter, Sarah, and son-in-law, Derek, had arrived late, stood with cold detachment, and fled the moment it ended. But that morning fog was violently shattered by the shrill ring of the telephone tearing through the stillness. On the line was Judge Henry Caldwell, an old family friend, but the voice on the other end didn't sound like a judge, it sounded terrified. He insisted Arthur come to his private chambers immediately to see something confidential Martha had hidden away. Yet, what caused Arthur's heart to hammer against his ribs, flooding his veins with the same combat-ready adrenaline he hadn't felt since the jungles 50 years ago, wasn't the urgency of the request, but Henry's chilling whisper, "Whatever you do, do not let Sarah or Derek know you're coming." "Martha made me swear, Arthur. She said your life depends on it." The line clicked dead, leaving Arthur standing in the dim hallway with the receiver still pressed to his ear. The suffocating silence of the house rushed back in, but the heavy blanket of grief that had pinned him to the chair for 3 days had evaporated. In its place was a cold, crystalline focus. Arthur placed the phone back on the cradle with a steady hand. He was 76 years old. His knees burned with arthritis every time a storm front rolled in off Lake Michigan, and his eyesight required thick bifocals to read the morning paper. To the world, and especially to his son-in-law Derek, he was just a fragile old man waiting to die. But inside the shell of aging flesh, the Marine Corps discipline that had kept him alive in the Aishau Valley woke up from its long slumber. He moved to the study, his cane thumping rhythmically against the hardwood floor. He pushed aside the portrait of a ship that hung behind his desk and spun the dial on the wall safe. Left, right, left. The tumblers clicked with a satisfying mechanical precision. Inside lay a stack of bonds, the deed to the house, and his service pistol, a Colt 1911 that he had kept oiled and wrapped in a silicone cloth for decades. Arthur reached in, his gnarled fingers wrapping around the cold steel of the grip. The weight of the weapon felt familiar, a grounding anchor in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. He checked the chamber. Empty. The magazine was full. For a long moment, he considered sliding it into his waistband. Then he shook his head. He was a forensic accountant now, a man of laws and ledgers, not a vigilante. Not yet. He placed the weapon back on the shelf, but the act of checking it had served its purpose. It reminded him that he was capable of violence if the situation demanded it. Arthur closed the safe and grabbed his heavy wool coat from the rack. He wrapped a scarf around his neck, pulled his flat cap low over his eyes, and stepped out into the biting wind. The Chicago winter was living up to its reputation. A blizzard was hammering the city, turning the streets into treacherous ribbons of white ice. The wind howled like a wounded animal, stinging his face, but Arthur barely felt the cold. He climbed into his beige sedan, the engine groaning in protest before catching life. As he backed out of the driveway, his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, not to check for traffic, but to scan for surveillance. Martha saying his life depended on this meeting changed everything. It meant the enemy was close. It meant the enemy might be watching. Arthur drove slowly through the suburban streets, his mind cataloging every vehicle that appeared behind him. A dark delivery van turned onto his street. Arthur watched it track him for 2 blocks. His heart rate remained steady, beating with the slow, powerful rhythm of a war drum. He signaled left, then abruptly turned right, circling the block in a classic counter-surveillance maneuver he had not used since his days consulting for the Bureau. The van continued straight, disappearing into the swirling snow. Arthur let out a breath he did not know he was holding. He was clean. But as he merged onto the highway heading toward downtown, the feeling of unease settled deep in his gut. The trusted world he had built with Martha over 40 years was dissolving, replaced by a landscape of shadows and secrets, and he was driving straight into the heart of the storm. The brick facade of the Caldwell building loomed out of the snow like a fortress. Arthur parked in the alleyway reserved for judges, his joints screaming in protest as he forced himself out of the warmth of the car. He leaned heavily on his cane, pushing through the heavy oak doors that Henry had already buzzed open. The lobby smelled of floor wax and old paper, a scent that usually brought comfort, but tonight it smelled like conspiracy. He took the elevator to the 4th floor, his hand hovering near his coat pocket where the phantom weight of his service pistol should have been. Henry Caldwell was waiting in the doorway of his chambers. The judge was a man of imposing stature, usually calm as a frozen lake, but tonight his face was gray and his hands trembled as he ushered Arthur inside and through the deadbolt. The office was dark, lit only by a single desk lamp that cast long, distorted shadows against the walls lined with legal texts. Arthur opened his mouth to ask what was so urgent that it required this level of secrecy, but the words died in his throat. Movement stirred in a high-backed leather chair facing the window. A figure turned slowly. Arthur stopped breathing. His cane clattered to the floor, the sound exploding like a gunshot in the quiet room. He grabbed the edge of the doorframe to keep from collapsing as his brain tried to reject the impossible image before him. It was Martha. His Martha. The woman he had watched lowered into the ground 3 days ago. She was pale, her face drawn and thin, looking more like a spirit than flesh and blood, but her eyes were bright and alive. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice rough with emotion. He stumbled forward, ignoring the pain in his knees, and fell to the floor beside the chair. He reached out with shaking hands to touch her face, expecting his fingers to pass through smoke. But she was warm. She was solid. She gripped his hand with surprising strength, and the tears he had refused to shed at the funeral finally broke free, hot and blinding. For a minute, the only sound in the room was the ragged breathing of 2 old souls reunited on the other side of the grave. "I do not understand," Arthur choked out, pulling back to look at her. "I saw the coffin. I saw the death certificate." "It was necessary," Henry said from the shadows, his voice grim. Martha squeezed Arthur's hand, her expression hardening into the steel resolve he had always admired. "Derek tried to kill me, Arthur. The heart attack was not natural. He switched my medication. He replaced my blood pressure pills with a compound designed to induce cardiac arrest. I realized it after the 2nd dose made me dizzy. I managed to get to Dr. Evans before the 3rd dose." Evans, Arthur repeated, the name of their family physician and lifelong friend floating up through the fog of his shock. "He helped us," Martha explained. "He recognized the symptoms of poisoning immediately. We knew if I survived openly, Derek would just try again, and next time he would not make a mistake. So we staged it." Evans signed the certificate. Henry arranged the closed casket service. "We had to let you grieve, Arthur. We had to let you believe I was gone because Derek was watching you. If you had shown even a flicker of hope, he would have known." Arthur looked from his wife to his oldest friend, the horror of the situation settling into his bones. His son-in-law was not just a thief or a gambler. He was a killer. And he had been living in their house, eating at their table, waiting for Martha to die. "You are in danger," Henry said, stepping into the light. "Now that Martha is out of the way, you are the only thing standing between Derek and the family trust." Arthur looked back at Martha. The grief was gone, burned away by a cold, white-hot rage. He picked up his cane and used it to pull himself to his feet. He was no longer just a husband or a father. He was a Marine again, and he had just been given his mission. "It did not start with me," Martha said, her voice trembling as she reached into the pocket of her cardigan. She pulled out a small, battered USB drive and pressed it into Arthur's palm. "It started with Lucas." Arthur looked down at the plastic rectangle. His son, Lucas, had been dead for 2 years, a suicide that had shattered the family foundation long before Derek began chipping away at the remains. The police had said Lucas jumped from the bridge due to depression and gambling debts. "He mailed his old winter coat to me 3 days before he died," Martha continued. "He said he wanted me to donate it to the shelter. I never could bring myself to give it away. Last week, I was holding it, just missing him, and I felt something hard in the lining. He sewed this inside." Arthur moved to Henry's heavy oak desk, his limp momentarily forgotten. He inserted the drive into the judge's computer. The screen flickered to life, revealing a chaotic nest of folders, but to Arthur's trained eye, it was a roadmap. He sat down, adjusting his bifocals, and the grieving father receded. The forensic accountant took the chair. For the next 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the clicking of the mouse and Arthur's slow, rhythmic breathing. He opened the spreadsheets. Rows of transactions from the family business, Vance Logistics, flooded the screen. Arthur began to trace the flow of capital. He saw payments to a vendor named North Star Consulting. He cross-referenced the tax ID number. It was invalid. He checked the routing numbers. They led to offshore accounts in the Caymans, then bounced back to a crypto exchange wallet based in Malta. "Look at this," Arthur whispered, his finger tracing a jagged line on the graph. $5,000 here. $12,000 there. Small enough to miss in the daily churn, big enough to bleed us dry over time. He kept digging, peeling back the layers of financial skin to reveal the rot underneath. The dates of the largest withdrawals coincided perfectly with weekends Derek had claimed to be away at business conferences. The total sum embezzled over 3 years was staggering. $340,000. But then Arthur saw the final entry. It was dated the day before Lucas died. A draft email to the district attorney, attached to the spreadsheet, outlining every cent Derek had stolen. Arthur froze. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The image of the spreadsheet blurred, replaced by the memory of Lucas's closed casket. They had been told the fall had made an open casket impossible. "He didn't jump," Arthur said, his voice devoid of any inflection. It was the flat, dead tone of a judge delivering a death sentence. "Lucas found the theft. He built this case. He was going to turn Derek in." Henry leaned over his shoulder, reading the unfinished email. "And Derek stopped him." "He killed him," Arthur corrected, standing up. He looked at the glowing monitor, seeing not numbers, but blood spatter. The suicide note was typed. The gambling debts were fabricated to explain the missing money. "Derek murdered my son to cover a $300,000 theft, and he killed him to keep playing the role of the wealthy executive." Arthur pulled the USB drive out of the computer and closed his fist around it tight enough to turn his knuckles white. The sorrow that had weighed him down since the funeral was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. He looked at Martha, then at Henry. "This evidence proves embezzlement," Arthur said, pocketing the drive. "But it doesn't prove murder. If we go to the police now, Derek gets 5 years for fraud. He gets out in 3. He killed our son, and he tried to kill my wife. Financial crimes are not enough." "What are you saying, Arthur?" Henry asked nervously. Arthur turned to the window, looking out at the blizzard burying Chicago in white. "I am saying we need more than a spreadsheet. We need a confession. And I am going to get it." "We need a Trojan horse," Arthur declared, turning away from the window to face his wife and his friend. "Derek thinks he is the predator. He thinks I am just a confused, grieving old man. So, I am going to give him exactly what he wants. I am going to become the perfect victim." Henry looked at him with concern etched into every line of his face. "Arthur, this is dangerous. You are talking about inviting a murderer into your home. If he suspects you know about Lucas, he won't hesitate to finish what he started with Martha." "He won't suspect," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding register. "Because he is arrogant. Narcissists always underestimate their victims. But to make this work, we need bait. Something he wants more than he wants me dead." "Money," Martha said softly. She looked up at Arthur, her eyes sharp. "He is drowning in debt, Arthur. That is why he was stealing from the company. If he thinks there is a fortune to be had, he will circle like a shark." Arthur nodded at Henry. "Draft a new will, Henry. Or rather, a trust. The Vance family trust. Make the assets significant. For $1 million in liquid assets and stocks, effective immediately upon Martha's death." Henry moved to his computer, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. $4 million. That will certainly get his attention. "But there has to be a catch," Arthur continued, leaning on his cane, his mind working through the strategy like he was planning an ambush in the jungle. "A competency clause. Stipulate that the beneficiary, me, must remain mentally competent to control the funds. If I am declared senile or incapacitated within 6 months, the trust freezes, or control passes to a court-appointed guardian, which Derek will assume he can manipulate." "I see where you are going," Henry said, typing rapidly. "If he kills you, the money goes into probate or to Sarah, and he risks an investigation. But if you are alive but mentally incompetent, he can try to gain power of attorney. It buys you time." "Exactly," Arthur said. "It forces him to keep me breathing, but it gives him a reason to move into the house. He will want to monitor me, drug me, drive me insane so he can take control. He will bring the war to my doorstep." Henry finished typing and printed the document. The sound of the printer whirring was the only noise in the room. He handed the fresh pages to Arthur. "This is a death warrant if you mess this up, old friend." Arthur took the document, folded it, and placed it inside his coat pocket. He looked at Martha one last time. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, leaving her there in the shadows, disguised as a dead woman. "Stay hidden," he told her. "Don't contact anyone but Henry. When the trap springs, I will meet you." "I will be ready," she promised. Arthur walked to the door. Before he grabbed the handle, he paused. He closed his eyes and let out a long breath. When he opened them, the steel in his spine seemed to dissolve. He slumped his shoulders forward, rounding his back. He allowed his mouth to hang slightly open and added a noticeable tremor to his right hand. He shuffled his feet, testing the weight of a man 10 years older and far more broken than he actually was. He turned back to Henry, his voice now a wavering, confused rasp. "How do I look, Judge?" Henry looked at the transformation, a mix of admiration and sadness in his eyes. "Like a man who has lost everything." "Good," Arthur said, his voice hardening for just a split second. "Because the show starts now." Arthur waited until exactly 10 in the morning to stage the incident. He calculated that Derek would be at his office, likely panicking over his mounting debts, while Sarah would be at home. He shoved the heavy hallway runner askew with his foot, then knocked a framed photograph of Martha off the wall. The glass shattered against the hardwood with a violence that made him wince. Arthur sat down heavily at the bottom of the stairs, disheveled his gray hair, and dialed Sarah's number. When she answered, he didn't speak immediately. He let his breathing sound ragged and shallow into the receiver. "Sarah," he wheezed, pitching his voice high and thin. I fell. The rug, it moved. Is Martha there? Tell Martha I broke the picture. Dad? Sarah's voice cracked with panic. Stay right there. Do not move. We are coming. 20 minutes later, the front door flew open. Sarah rushed in first, her face pale and drawn. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his legs, afraid to touch him in case something was broken. Derek followed her in, closing the door against the cold wind. He moved not with the urgency of a worried relative, but with the saunter of a man surveying a property he intended to acquire. He wore a sharp charcoal suit and a watch that cost more than Arthur's first car, and his eyes were not on Arthur, but on the antique grandfather clock standing in the corner. "Oh my God, Dad," Sarah cried, checking his forehead. "Are you dizzy? Does anything hurt?" Arthur looked at her with vacant, watery eyes. He blinked slowly, as if trying to bring her into focus. "Sarah, why are you crying?" I slipped." He turned his head toward Derek and let a tremor run through his right hand as he pointed. "Who is that? Is that the doctor?" Derek stepped forward, his expression shifting into a mask of practiced concern. "It is Derek, Dad. Your son-in-law." Arthur frowned, looking confused. "Derek?" "Right. Derek. I thought, never mind. I am just tired. I wanted to ask Martha where she put my reading glasses." Sarah let out a small, strangled sob. "Dad, Mom is gone. Remember?" Arthur let his face crumble. "Gone? No. She was just here." Derek exchanged a look with Sarah, a look that Arthur caught in his peripheral vision. It was a look of validation. "See," Derek's eyes said. "I told you so." "This is exactly what I was afraid of, Sarah," Derek said, his voice smooth and authoritative. "He is not just physically frail, his mind is going. He cannot be here alone. What if he leaves the gas on next time? What if he wanders out into the snow?" "I can hire a nurse," Sarah stammered, helping Arthur into a sitting position. "A full-time caretaker." "No strangers," Derek cut her off sharply. He placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder. The grip was tight, possessive. "Family takes care of family. We are moving in, Sarah. We will rent out our condo. It is the only solution. We can look after him, manage the house, make sure he is safe." Arthur leaned his head back against the wall, closing his eyes to hide the sharp clarity within them. He felt Derek's hand on his shoulder not as a comfort, but as a claim. The wolf was not just at the door, the wolf was measuring the drapes. "I don't want to be a burden," Arthur mumbled, his voice trembling perfectly. "You are not a burden, Arthur," Derek said, looking down at him with a smile that did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. "We are going to take care of everything. You won't have to worry about a single thing from now on." Arthur nodded weakly, allowing Sarah to help him stand. The trap was set. The enemy had invited himself in, convinced the castle was undefended. Derek thought he was seizing control, but he had just walked into a kill box. 2 days later, Henry Caldwell sat in the high-backed armchair in Arthur's living room, a leather briefcase resting on his knees. Sarah sat on the sofa, wringing her hands, while Derek paced near the fireplace, trying to look casual but failing to hide the tension in his jaw. Arthur sat opposite Henry, a blanket draped over his legs, staring blankly at a dust mote floating in a shaft of winter sunlight. "I have reviewed Martha's final wishes," Henry began, his voice carrying the solemn weight of the bench. "As you know, the house is already in Arthur's name. However, there is the matter of the Vance family trust." Derek stopped pacing. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Trust? I wasn't aware Martha had set up a trust." "She was a private woman," Henry said, adjusting his glasses. "And a prudent one. She liquidated several long-term investments shortly before her passing. The trust currently holds assets totaling $4 million. The silence in the room was absolute. Arthur heard Sarah's sharp intake of breath. He saw Derek's pupils dilate, a biological reaction to the scent of prey. $4 million. It was enough to wipe out Derek's gambling debts 10 times over. It was freedom. It was salvation. And who is the beneficiary? Derek asked, his voice tight. Arthur is the sole beneficiary, Henry stated. Derek exhaled, a mixture of relief and greed washing over his face. He walked over to stand behind Sarah, placing his hands on her shoulders, squeezing them just a little too hard. Well, that is good news. It ensures Dad is taken care of. As his primary caregivers, we can help him manage. There is a condition, Henry interrupted, cutting Derek off. He pulled a single sheet of paper from the briefcase. Martha was concerned about Arthur's declining health. The trust stipulates that Arthur must maintain full legal competency to access the funds. Meaning what, exactly? Derek asked, his tone sharpening. Meaning that if Arthur is declared mentally incompetent by a medical professional within the next 6 months, the trust is frozen. Control does not pass to family. It passes to a court-appointed guardian for a probationary period of 10 years to prevent elder exploitation. Arthur let his head loll to the side, looking confused. Henry, what are you talking about? Did I win the lottery? Henry looked at Arthur with a mask of pity. No, Arthur. It is just paperwork. Derek stared at the old man, his mind racing visible behind his eyes. He was doing the math. If he killed Arthur now, the money might get tied up in probate or go to Sarah, which was manageable but risky. But if Arthur was alive but declared incompetent, the money was frozen for a decade. Derek needed Arthur lucid enough to sign checks but confused enough to be manipulated. He needed power of attorney, not a death certificate. Not yet. So, Derek said slowly, forcing a smile that looked like a baring of teeth. We just need to keep Dad healthy and sharp. That is what we all want, isn't it? To keep him with us. Yes, Sarah whispered, wiping a tear. Of course. Derek looked at Arthur, and for a second, the mask slipped completely. Arthur saw the calculation, the malice, the sheer predatory hunger. Derek wasn't looking at a father-in-law, he was looking at a walking ATM machine that he needed to hack. We will take great care of him, Judge, Derek said. You have my word. Arthur offered a weak, trembling smile. Thank you, son. You are a good boy. Henry stood up to leave, snapping his briefcase shut. As he passed Arthur, he gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The bait had been taken. The hook was set. Now, the long wait began. The transformation happened the moment the garage door rumbled shut behind Derek's luxury sedan. Sarah had left an hour earlier for the grocery store, leaving Arthur alone in the house that was no longer his own. Arthur waited by the window, watching Derek's car disappear around the corner of the snowbanked street. As soon as the vehicle was out of sight, the trembling in Arthur's hands vanished. He straightened his spine, shedding 20 years of feigned decrepitude in a single breath. He abandoned his cane by the recliner and moved toward the basement door with the silent, predatory grace of a jungle cat. Down in the workshop, amidst jars of nails and old paint cans, Arthur pulled a heavy toolbox from the bottom shelf. It was covered in dust, seemingly untouched for decades. He flipped the latches and opened the false bottom he had constructed during the height of the Cold War paranoia. Inside lay a collection of electronics that looked ancient by modern standards, black boxes with copper wiring and small, button-sized microphones. They were analog, not digital. Arthur preferred them. They were harder for modern scanners to detect, and they didn't rely on Wi-Fi signals that Derek could monitor. He checked his watch. He had 45 minutes before Sarah returned. It was plenty of time. Arthur moved to the dining room first. This was neutral ground, the place where Derek let his guard down over wine and dinner. Arthur dragged a chair to the center of the room. Ignoring the sharp protest of his arthritic knees, he climbed up, unscrewed the brass casing of the chandelier, and nestled the tiny transmitter into the hollow space between the wiring. He secured it with a dab of putty, wiped away his fingerprints with a handkerchief, and descended. Next was the guest room, which Derek had aggressively commandeered as his home office. Arthur stepped inside and felt a wave of revulsion. Derek had already rearranged the furniture, pushing Martha's sewing table into the closet to make room for his multiple monitors and leather executive chair. Arthur knelt beneath the heavy oak desk. He taped a second transmitter to the underside of the drawer, close to where Derek sat when he made his private calls. He worked with the dexterity of a surgeon, his mind completely focused. Every second counted. Every placement had to be perfect. He activated the receiver, a modified transistor radio he kept in his cardigan pocket, and plugged in a single earpiece. Static hissed, followed by the clear, amplified sound of the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. The audio was crisp. The house was no longer just a building, it was a listening post, and Arthur was the station chief. The sound of a car engine cutting in the driveway made him freeze. Sarah was back early. Arthur pocketed the earpiece and moved fast, faster than any 76-year-old man should be able to move. He replaced the chair in the dining room, smoothed the rug, and grabbed his cane from the living room floor. By the time the front door lock clicked, Arthur was slumped in his recliner, the Afghan blanket pulled up to his chin, his mouth slightly open, staring vacantly at the television. "Dad?" Sarah called out, struggling with grocery bags. "I am home. Did you need anything while I was gone?" Arthur turned his head slowly, letting a few seconds pass before his eyes seemed to register her presence. "Sarah, I think I fell asleep. Is it lunchtime yet?" Sarah smiled kindly, completely unaware that the frail old man in front of her had just turned her new home into a surveillance trap. "No, Dad," she said gentle. "It is barely 10 in the morning." Arthur nodded weakly and closed his eyes again. But inside, he was wide awake. The trap was armed. Now, he just had to wait for the prey to speak. The voices came at night, ghostly whispers bleeding through the earpiece Arthur kept hidden beneath his pillow. For 3 nights, He had heard nothing but the mundane friction of a marriage in decline, Sarah apologizing for forgotten errands, Derek complaining about the drafty house. But on the fourth night, the tone changed. It was 2 in the morning. The house was silent, buried under a fresh foot of snow, but in the home office, Derek was pacing. The rhythm of his footsteps transmitted clearly through the bug under the desk. 3 steps, turn, 3 steps, turn. A caged animal. Then, the sound of a phone dialing. Arthur pressed the earpiece deeper into his ear, holding his breath. "It's me," Derek's voice hissed, low and venomous. "No, listen to me. I need more time. The old man is practically a vegetable, but the legal red tape is a nightmare." A pause. The voice on the other end was inaudible, but Arthur could guess the response by the way Derek's breathing hitched. "I know what I owe, Tony," Derek snapped, his voice rising in panic before dropping back to a whisper. 500 grand. "I know. But you can't squeeze blood from a stone. I have access to a trust. 4 million. Yes, 4. But it takes time to get the power of attorney signed. He has to trust me. If I push too hard, the daughter gets suspicious." Arthur's hand clenched into a fist under the covers. $500,000. The price of his son's life. The price of his wife's safety. Derek had sold them all out for a crypto gamble that went bust. "Don't you threaten me," Derek snarled, the fear in his voice now palpable. "You touch my knees and you get nothing. You hear me? I am the golden goose here. Just give me a week. 1 week and I will have him signing whatever I put in front of him." The call ended with the violent slam of a phone against the desk. Then, silence. Arthur lay in the dark, his heart hammering a slow, cold rhythm. He had the motive. He had the confession of debt. But he still needed the confession of murder. The door to the office opened, and Derek's heavy footsteps moved down the hall, stopping not at the master bedroom, but at the guest room where Sarah was sleeping. Arthur heard the door creak open. "Sarah," Derek's voice was sharp, cruel. "Wake up." "Derek?" Sarah's voice was thick with sleep. "What time is it?" "Shut up and listen. Where does your father keep his old files?" "The paper records for the house deed." I don't know. In the study, maybe." "Why?" "Because I need to know what I am dealing with," Derek growled. "And tomorrow, you are going to get him to sign the transfer papers for the car. We need cash for expenses. You tell him it is for insurance." "But, Derek, he loves that car." "It's..." "Do it." The sound of a slap, flesh striking flesh, cracked through the earpiece like a gunshot. "Don't you look at me like that. We are in this mess because your brother was a snitch and your father is a senile burden. You do what I say, or we are both on the street. Do you understand?" Arthur heard Sarah's muffled sobbing. "Yes. I understand." In his bed, Arthur squeezed his eyes shut, tears leaking out to wet the pillow. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to burst through the wall, to drag Derek out of that room and beat him within an inch of his life. He could do it. Even at 76, with the element of surprise and the rage burning in his gut, he could end this. But he stayed still. He forced his muscles to relax, forced his breathing to remain even. If he moved now, he saved Sarah for a night but lost the war. He needed Derek to feel safe. He needed the monster to think he was the master of the house, right up until the moment the trap snapped shut. "I am sorry, baby girl," Arthur whispered into the darkness. Just hold on. Just a little longer. The morning sun revealed the bruise on Sarah's cheek, a purplish smudge hastily covered with foundation. Arthur saw it the moment she brought him his tea, but he forced his eyes to slide past it, focusing instead on the steam rising from the mug. He took a sip, his hand trembling with a mix of performance and genuine, simmering fury. The tea was lukewarm, just like the reception he gave Derek when his son-in-law lumbered into the kitchen, eyes bloodshot and smelling of stale whiskey. Arthur decided it was time to go on the offensive. He would not use fists or guns. He would use the very weapon Derek believed was his own weakness, his mind. It started with small things. When Derek left his car keys on the counter to take a call, Arthur swiped them with a sleight of hand he hadn't used since performing magic tricks for a 5-year-old Lucas. He dropped them into the trash compactor, buried under coffee grounds. Derek spent an hour tearing the kitchen apart, screaming at Sarah, while Arthur sat in his chair, humming a tune from the 40s, watching the chaos with vacant, watery eyes. When Derek finally found them, disgusting and sticky, he looked at Arthur with suspicion, but Arthur was already pretending to nap, a line of drool at the corner of his mouth. Arthur escalated the campaign. He tilted the paintings in the hallway just a few degrees every day, enough to be noticeable but subtle enough to make Derek question his own eyesight. He moved Derek's expensive scotch to the back of the cabinet and replaced it with vinegar in the decanter. He hid one of every pair of Derek's socks. He was gaslighting the gaslighter, chipping away at the man's sanity one minor inconvenience at a time. But the masterstroke came on Tuesday. Arthur waited until Derek was pacing the living room, nursing a glass of the vinegar scotch he hadn't yet realized was tainted, muttering about deadlines. Arthur stared out the window at the massive white oak tree in the backyard, its branches heavy with snow. "Martha never knew," Arthur mumbled, just loud enough to be heard. Derek stopped pacing. He looked at the old man. "What did you say?" Arthur blinked, looking startled. "What?" "Oh, nothing. Just the box." She never knew about the box. Derek stepped closer, his greed cutting through his exhaustion. "What box, Arthur?" Arthur leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "The gold. From the war. I buried it. 1968. Right under the roots of the white oak. Worth a fortune now, I bet. But, shoo. Don't tell the tax man." He tapped his nose and leaned back, closing his eyes. Derek stood frozen for a moment, looking from the old man to the window. He let out a scoff, dismissing it as senile ramblings. But Arthur knew the seed had been planted in fertile, desperate soil. A man who owed $500,000 to the mob would believe in fairy tales if they promised a payout. At 2 in the morning, Arthur woke up and moved to the window. Through the swirling snow, he saw a flashlight beam cutting through the dark backyard. There, shivering in his designer coat, was Derek, hacking away at the frozen earth beneath the oak tree with a shovel. Arthur watched him dig for an hour, battling the wind and the ice, searching for a treasure that didn't exist. When Derek finally gave up, exhausted and empty-handed, he looked up at the house with a face twisted in hate. Arthur slipped back into bed, smiling into the darkness. But the victory came with a cost. The next day, Derek was a wreck. His eyes were sunken, his temper short, and his paranoia rampant. He took his frustration out on Arthur's care regimen. "Sarah," Derek barked at lunch. "Why are we giving him these painkillers? They make him groggy. He sleeps all day." "The doctor prescribed them for his arthritis, Derek," Sarah argued weakly. "He is in pain." "He is an addict, that is what he is," Derek snapped, sweeping the pill bottles into his pocket. "We are cutting him off. He needs clarity, not chemicals. And this food, it is too rich. His heart can't take it. Soup and crackers from now on." Arthur watched as his medication disappeared into Derek's jacket. He said nothing, though his knees were already throbbing in anticipation of the coming agony. That night, dinner was a bowl of watery broth and 2 saltines. Arthur ate it slowly, his hands shaking for real this time as the pain in his joints flared up without the suppression of the medicine. He watched Derek eat a steak across the table, slicing the meat with aggressive, violent strokes. Derek glared at him, waiting for a complaint, waiting for the old man to beg. Arthur did not beg. He dipped his spoon into the broth and swallowed the flavorless liquid, staring through Derek with the 1,000-yard stare of a man who had survived rice rations and jungle rot. "He is trying to break me," Arthur thought, feeling the ache in his bones spread like fire. "He thinks hunger and pain will make me sign." But Derek had forgotten one thing. Arthur Vance had been forged in a crucible far hotter than a cold suburban dining room. He had learned to endure suffering long before Derek was born. Every pang of hunger, every throb of pain only sharpened his focus, turning his body into a weapon of pure will. "Eat your steak," Arthur thought, watching his son-in-law chew. "Enjoy it. Because it is the last good meal you are ever going to have." The hunger was a gnawing rat in Arthur's belly, and the pain in his knees was a constant, screaming chorus, but his mind remained a fortress. He knew he could endure Derek's siege for weeks if necessary. But Sarah was crumbling. Arthur watched her through the kitchen doorway as she scrubbed a dish that was already clean. Her shoulders were hunched, her movements jerky and fearful. She flinched every time the floorboards creaked upstairs where Derek was on another frantic call. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a sickly yellow, but the darkness in her eyes had deepened. She was the weak link. If she broke under Derek's pressure, she might sign something, agree to something, or worse, Derek might decide she was a liability to be removed. It was time to bring her in from the cold. Arthur waited for the window of opportunity. It came on Thursday afternoon. Derek slammed the front door, shouting into his phone as he headed to meet with his investors, a euphemism Arthur knew meant begging for time from the mob. As soon as the car pulled away, Arthur moved. "Sarah," he called out. His voice was not the wavering rasp of the invalid father she had been nursing. It was the deep, resonant baritone that used to read her bedtime stories. It was clear. It was commanding. Sarah froze at the sink. She turned slowly, dropping the sponge. "Dad?" "Come here, honey," Arthur said, standing in the doorway without his cane, his posture straight. "We need to talk." Sarah stared at him, her mouth opening and closing. You are walking. You are talking. I don't. Come to the study. Now." She followed him like a sleepwalker. Arthur led her into the room and closed the door, locking it. He went to the loose floorboard under the rug, another hiding spot from the Cold War days, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He sat behind his desk and gestured for her to sit. "Dad, what is happening? Have you been faking it?" "I have been surviving, Sarah. Just like you." Arthur slid the envelope across the desk. "Open it." Sarah's hands shook as she undid the clasp. She pulled out a stack of papers. On top were the bank statements Arthur had analyzed, the ones showing the flow of money from Vance Logistics to the crypto accounts. Below that were photos, grainy but clear, of Derek meeting with a woman in a hotel lobby, handing her a jewelry box. "Look at the dates, Sarah," Arthur said gently. "The $50,000 withdrawn from the company emergency fund. That was the day you fell down the stairs and broke your arm. He told you business was bad, that he couldn't afford a night nurse. He spent it on her." Sarah stared at the photo, tears welling up but not falling. She flicked to the next page. It was a copy of the gambling debt ledger Arthur had hacked from Derek's email, showing the $300,000 owed to the North Star Syndicate. "And look at the date of the biggest withdrawal," Arthur continued, his voice hardening. "February 12th. 2 years ago. The day Lucas died," Sarah whispered. Arthur nodded. "Derek paid off $100,000 of his debt that day, with money stolen from the company accounts Lucas managed. Lucas found out, Sarah. He didn't kill himself. He was going to turn Derek in." "No," Sarah moaned, dropping the papers as if they burned her fingers. "No, Dad. Derek he is awful, he is mean, but he is not a murderer. He wouldn't." Arthur stood up and walked around the desk. He placed his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "Sarah, listen to me. He switched Martha's heart medication. He tried to kill your mother." Sarah recoiled, her face draining of all color. "What?" "Mom. Mom had a heart attack. She is alive, Sarah." The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Sarah stared at him, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. "Alive? But the funeral? I saw. We staged it," Arthur said. "We had to. To protect her. To protect you. Derek tried to poison her to get to the trust money. And right now, he is starving me and waiting for me to sign over control so he can do the same to me. And once he has the money, Sarah, once he has the $4 million, do you think he needs a wife who asks questions?" Sarah crumbled. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed, a deep, guttural sound of a world shattering. Arthur held her, rocking her like he had when she was a child afraid of the dark. But this darkness was real, and it was living in their guest room. He hits me, Dad," she choked out, the confession finally breaking free. "He says it is my fault. He says I am stupid. He says if I leave, he will kill you." Arthur's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. The urge to kill Derek rose up in him, primal and overwhelming. But he pushed it down. He needed justice, not just vengeance. "He is never going to hurt you again," Arthur promised, smoothing her hair. "But I need you to be strong. I need you to be my soldier, Sarah. Can you do that? Can you wipe your face, go back out there, and pretend you don't know he is a monster? Just for a little longer?" Sarah pulled back. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked at the photos on the desk, then up at her father. The fear in her eyes was still there, but behind it, something new was kindling. A spark of Vance steel. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Arthur smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. "I need you to help me set the table for his last supper." The endgame began with a text message. Arthur intersected it on Friday evening while Derek was in the shower. The phone lit up on the bedside table, buzzing angrily against the wood. Arthur glanced at the screen, 48 hours. "Pay up or we take a knee. No more extensions." Arthur retreated to his room before the water stopped running. 48 hours. The timeline had collapsed. Derek was cornered, and a cornered rat didn't negotiate, it bit. That night, The tension in the house was thick enough to choke on. Derek didn't eat. He paced the living room, a glass of whiskey in one hand, muttering to himself. Every time he looked at Arthur, his eyes were devoid of the mock sympathy he had worn for weeks. They were flat, dead, calculating. He wasn't looking at a father-in-law anymore, he was looking at an obstacle. Sarah played her part perfectly. She sat in the corner, knitting, her hands steady though her face was pale. She caught Arthur's eye once, a quick, terrified glance that asked, "Is it time?" Arthur gave a micro-nod. The next morning, Saturday, Derek made his move. He stormed into the kitchen while Arthur was sipping his broth. He slammed a sheaf of papers onto the table. "Sign these," Derek ordered. His voice was raw, stripped of all pretense. Arthur looked up, feigning confusion. What are these, son?" "Power of attorney," Derek snapped. "Full control of the assets. The trust, the house, the accounts. All of it. I need to manage it for you. You are not capable anymore." I don't know," Arthur stammered, his hands shaking as he reached for his reading glasses. "I should ask Henry." "No, Henry." Derek roared, swiping the glasses off the table. They clattered to the floor. "You sign it now, Arthur. Or so help me God, I will put you in a home so cheap and dirty you will beg to die." Sarah gasped from the doorway. "Derek, please. You are scaring him." "Shut up, Sarah." Derek spun on her, raising a hand. She flinched, but stood her ground. I will sign," Arthur whispered, cowering in his chair. Just let me rest. My hand hurts. Tomorrow. Please, Derek. Tomorrow." Derek stared at him, his chest heaving. He looked at the clock. He had 48 hours, but he wanted it done now. Yet, the look of pathetic terror on Arthur's face seemed to satisfy some dark need in him. "Fine," Derek spat. "Tomorrow morning. 8 a.m. If these aren't signed, I am done playing nursemaid. Do you understand?" Arthur nodded, tears of fake fear leaking from his eyes. Derek stormed out, grabbing his coat. "I am going out. Don't wait up." As soon as the door slammed, Arthur dropped the act. He stood up, his face grim. He is going to meet his contact. Or maybe just drink enough courage to do what he plans to do tomorrow. What does he plan to do? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "If I sign those papers, I am useless to him," Arthur said calmly. "He can't risk me recovering and revoking the power. He needs me permanently incapacitated. Or dead." "Dead?" Sarah whispered. Arthur moved to the window, watching the snow fall. He won't wait for the ink to dry. He will stage an accident. A fall down the stairs. A slip in the tub. He is desperate, Sarah. And desperate men are predictable. He turned to her. "Go to your room. Lock the door. Do not come out until I tell you." "What are you going to do?" "I am going to prepare the battlefield," Arthur said. He moved to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a roll of duct tape and a small bottle of oil. Then he went to the basement door. He loosened the screws on the handrail just enough so it would hold weight for a moment, then give way under pressure. He taped a tripwire of fishing line across the bottom step, invisible in the dim light. He wasn't planning to kill Derek. He wanted him alive. He wanted him to confess. But if Derek decided to get physical, Arthur intended to make sure the ground he walked on was as treacherous as the lies he told. He went back to his room and pulled the Nokia phone from under his mattress. He typed a single message to Henry: "The wolf is at the door. Tomorrow morning. Bring the cavalry." He lay down on the bed, fully dressed, his cane within reach. He listened to the wind howling outside, a perfect cover for the violence to come. The ticking clock in the hall sounded like a countdown. 48 hours had become 12. The audit was over. The collection was about to begin. Derek returned at 6 o'clock, carrying grocery bags and wearing a smile that was far more terrifying than his earlier rage. "I want to apologize for this morning, Dad," he said, his voice silky smooth as he entered the bedroom. "I know I have been under a lot of stress. I made your favorite cream of mushroom soup. A peace offering before we handle business tomorrow." He placed the wooden tray on the nightstand. The steam rose, carrying the scent of earth, heavy cream, and thyme. But Arthur's nose, trained to detect accelerants in arson cases and chemical residues in fraud investigations decades ago, picked up something else immediately. A faint, acrid undertone cutting through the garlic. Bitter almonds. It was subtle, masked by the savory broth, but to a forensic expert, it was as loud as a siren. Cyanide. Or perhaps a lethal cocktail of crushed opioids similar to what he had used on Martha. "Go on," Derek urged, hovering by the door frame, his arms crossed. "It will help you sleep. You need your rest for tomorrow." Arthur picked up the spoon. His hand trembled, not from the feigned Parkinson's he had been mimicking, but from the visceral realization that he was holding his own murder weapon. "Thank you, son," he mumbled, bringing the spoon halfway to his mouth before stopping. Could you get me a glass of water? This looks very rich. My throat is dry." Derek hesitated, his eyes flicking to the bowl, then to the bathroom door. He sighed, impatient but eager to facilitate the ingestion. "Sure. 1 glass of water." Derek turned and walked into the ensuite bathroom. In that split second, the frail old man vanished. Arthur moved with lightning speed. He pulled a heavy-duty Ziploc bag he had taped inside the lining of his cardigan earlier that afternoon. With a steady hand, he poured the contents of the bowl into the bag, sealed it, and shoved it back against his ribs, concealing the bulge under the thick wool. When Derek turned back with the glass, Arthur was wiping his mouth with a napkin, the bowl sitting on the tray, empty save for a few smears of cream. "Delicious," Arthur said, taking the water with a shaky hand. He took a sip, and then let the glass slip from his fingers. It thumped onto the carpet, spilling water. Arthur clutched his chest, his face twisting in a grimace. "Oh," he groaned, leaning back against the headboard. "My chest. It feels tight. My heart is fluttering." Derek watched him, and the pretense dropped. He didn't rush to help. He didn't call a doctor. He smiled, a cold, satisfied expression that chilled the room. "Just indigestion, Dad. Lie down. Let it do its work." "Medicine?" Arthur asked weakly, letting his eyelids droop. "I didn't take any medicine." "You will feel better in the morning," Derek said softly, stepping back into the hallway. "Or you won't feel anything at all." He took the tray and closed the door. He didn't lock it this time. He didn't need to. He believed the poison was already coursing through the old man's veins, shutting down his organs one by one. Arthur waited 10 minutes, listening to the floorboards creak as Derek went downstairs to pour himself a celebratory drink. When silence finally settled over the house, Arthur sat up. He pulled the bag of toxic soup from his shirt and hid it beneath the mattress. Evidence. Attempted murder number 3. He retrieved the Nokia phone. His thumbs flew across the keypad. The net is set. Tomorrow morning. He hit send, then lay back down, staring at the ceiling. Downstairs, he could hear Derek whistling. It was the sound of a man who thought he had won. Arthur closed his eyes. Enjoy the silence, Derek. Tomorrow, the music stops. The dawn light filtered through the curtains in jagged gray stripes, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the cold air. Arthur was sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, his back straight as a rod, his hands resting calmly on his knees. He watched the doorknob turn. It moved slowly, quietly. Then the door swung open. Derek stepped inside. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. His eyes were wild, rimmed with red, and his skin was pasty. In his left hand, he clutched the power of attorney documents. In his right hand, held low against his thigh, was a pistol fitted with a thick, black suppressor. "You are awake," Derek said, his voice flat. He sounded disappointed. "That souk should have stopped your heart hours ago. I suppose you are tougher than you look, old man." He raised the gun, leveling it at Arthur's chest. "Get up. Move to the desk. You are going to sign these papers, and then you are going to have a tragic fall down the stairs. I don't have time for the poison to work anymore." Arthur did not move. He did not cower. He looked at the gun, then up at Derek's face, his expression unreadable. "You killed Lucas," Arthur stated. It was not a question. Derek let out a short bark of laughter that sounded more like a cough. He stepped closer, the gun unwavering. "Of course I killed him. Your golden boy found my accounts. He came to me, all self-righteous, waving his spreadsheets. He gave me 24 hours to confess to you. He thought he was saving the company. He thought he was saving the family honor. So you staged the suicide," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, losing the tremor completely. "I drugged his wine," Derek sneered. "Then I threw him off the bridge. It was easy. He was weak. Just like you. Just like Sarah. Now get up and sign the damn papers." Arthur stood up. He did not struggle to his feet. He did not lean on the nightstand. He rose with a smooth, kinetic power that defied his 76 years. He stood to his full height, rolling his shoulders back, and the transformation was so sudden, so absolute, that Derek took an involuntary step backward. The confused, senile invalid was gone. In his place stood a veteran of the Tet Offensive, a man who had hunted fraud for the Bureau for 30 years. "I am not weak, Derek," Arthur said. His voice was cold, precise, and terrified Derek more than a scream would have. "And neither was my son." What is this?" Derek stammered, the gun shaking slightly in his hand. Arthur took a step forward, ignoring the weapon pointed at his heart. "February 12, 2 years ago," Arthur recited, his tone clipped and professional, as if reading a court transcript. "You transferred $100,000 to a crypto wallet in Malta to pay the North Star Syndicate. You covered it by creating a fake vendor invoice for North Star Consulting." Derek's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "March 15th, Arthur continued, taking another step. You pawned Sarah's diamond tennis bracelet to pay interest on a poker debt. You told her she lost it. June 3rd. You embezzled $45,000 from the company emergency fund, the day my daughter broke her arm, to buy a silence fee for your mistress in the city." "How? How do you know that?" Derek whispered, backing up until he hit the door frame. Arthur stopped 3 feet away. His eyes bored into Derek's soul, stripping away the arrogance, leaving only the naked fear underneath. "I know because I am a forensic accountant," Arthur said. "I didn't lose my mind, Derek. I was just biding my time while I audited yours. I have the USB drive Lucas hid in his coat. I have the recordings of your calls to the mob. I have the poison soup in a bag under this mattress. And now, I have your confession." Derek stared at him, the reality crashing down. The old man wasn't the victim. He was the executioner. You set me up," Derek hissed, his face twisting into a mask of pure animal panic. "You set me up." "I audited you," Arthur corrected calmly. "And you came up short." Derek's finger tightened on the trigger. Panic replaced greed. If he couldn't get the money, he would settle for survival. "Then your audit ends here," Derek screamed, raising the gun to Arthur's face. But before he could pull the trigger, a shadow moved in the hallway behind him. "No." The scream tore from Sarah's throat as she lunged from the hallway. She swung a heavy brass table lamp with all the desperate strength of a woman shattering years of fear. The base of the lamp connected with Derek's elbow with a sickening crunch just as his finger tightened on the trigger. The gun discharged, the suppressed shot sounding like a heavy cough, and the bullet buried itself in the plaster ceiling, showering white dust onto the bedspread. Derek howled in pain, dropping the weapon as his arm went numb. He spun around, his face twisted in animalistic rage, and backhanded Sarah across the face. She crumpled to the floor, but the distraction had bought the necessary seconds. Downstairs, the front door exploded inward with a deafening crash that shook the entire frame of the house. Police. Federal agents. Drop the weapon. The shout roared up the stairwell, followed by the thunder of heavy boots charging the steps. Derek froze, clutching his shattered elbow, his eyes darting frantically from Arthur to the window to the door. He was trapped. The hallway suddenly filled with men in tactical gear. Red laser sights danced across Derek's chest, a chaotic light show painting a target on his heart. "Get on the ground. Now." Derek hesitated for a fraction of a second, looking at the gun on the floor, but a sniper's laser fixed directly on his forehead stopped him. He fell to his knees, then to his stomach, sobbing. Officers swarmed him, knees pressing into his back, sick ties biting into his wrists. Arthur stood still amidst the chaos, his breathing steady. He reached down and gently helped Sarah to her feet, pulling her behind him as the room filled with law enforcement. The crowd of officers parted near the door. Judge Henry Caldwell stepped into the room, his face grim but relieved. Behind him walked a figure that made Derek stop struggling against the floor. He craned his neck, his eyes bulging as if they were about to pop from his skull. Martha Vance walked into the bedroom. She looked pale and older than she had a week ago, but she was undeniably alive. She stopped in front of Derek, looking down at him with an expression of profound disappointment. "Martha." Derek wheezed, the air leaving his lungs. "No. That is impossible. I killed you. I watched you die." "You tried, Derek," Martha said, her voice steady. "You switched my pills. You tried to stop my heart. But you failed. Just like you failed to kill Arthur. Just like you failed to destroy this family. It was a setup." Derek screamed, spittle flying from his lips as they hauled him to his feet. "Entrapment. This is illegal. And her. He thrashed toward Sarah. She was in on it. She helped me. She wanted the money just as much as I did. She killed Lucas. Sarah shrank back, trembling, but Arthur squeezed her hand, anchoring her. He stepped forward, leaning on his cane not out of necessity, but out of authority. He looked Derek in the eye, seeing the pathetic, cornered creature beneath the expensive suit. "Save your breath for the jury, Derek," Arthur said coldly. "The house is wired. The dining room light fixture. The underside of your desk. The floorboards. We have everything. We have you threatening Sarah. We have you admitting to the embezzlement. And we have your confession to the murders of Lucas Vance and the attempted murder of Martha Vance." "You are lying," Derek spat. "You are a senile old man." Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out the earpiece he had worn for nights on end. He held it up. "I told you, Derek. I am an auditor. And your accounts are closed." "Officer, take him away," Henry ordered. As two officers dragged Derek out of the room, screaming obscenities and threats that faded down the stairs, the adrenaline finally began to ebb from Arthur's veins. He looked at Martha, then at Sarah. The three of them stood in the wreckage of the bedroom, surrounded by police, but for the first time in 2 years, the house felt clean. The ghost of Lucas was no longer a secret shame, he was avenged. The war was over. 6 months after the flashing lights of the police cruisers faded from the quiet suburban street, the final gavel fell in the Cook County Courthouse. The evidence Arthur Vance collected was insurmountable. The audio recordings, the poisoned soup, and the recovered financial data painted a portrait of a monster hiding in a tailored suit. Derek Thorne was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Lucas Vance and the attempted murders of Martha and Arthur Vance. As he was led away in shackles, he looked back at the gallery, but the family he had tried to destroy was not looking at him. They were looking forward. Sarah received a sentence of 2 years of probation, citing her cooperation, her testimony, and the documented history of abuse she had endured. She sat in the back row, not as a victim, but as a survivor in progress. She had started intensive therapy and was slowly relearning how to trust her own voice, a voice that had saved her father's life in that final, violent second. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Arthur and Martha stood before a new headstone in the city cemetery. The wind off the lake was cold, but it felt clean, stripping away the lingering humidity of the past summer. The inscription on the stone no longer hinted at a tragic accident or a shameful suicide. It read simply, "Lucas Vance. Beloved son. Brother. Guardian of truth." "We did it," Martha whispered, placing a bouquet of white lilies on the grass. "He can rest now. The world knows he was a good man." Arthur nodded, leaning on his cane. The physical act was no longer a ruse. The stress of the operation had taken its toll, but his spirit was lighter than it had been in years. "He wasn't a thief," Arthur said softly. "He was a hero who stood up when it counted. And we made sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain." They turned and walked back to the car, but their work was not finished. With the assets recovered from the frozen trust and the liquidation of Derek's hidden accounts, Arthur and Martha had established a new legacy. The Lucas Vance Foundation opened its doors the following week. Its mission was unique, providing free forensic accounting and legal services to the elderly, helping them detect financial abuse, fraud, and exploitation before it turned deadly. Arthur sat in his new office at the foundation, looking at a framed photo of Lucas. He turned his gaze outward, as if addressing the world beyond the glass. He realized that the war he had fought in his own home was just one battle in a much larger conflict. The most dangerous enemies do not always storm the gates with guns, Arthur thought. Sometimes, they come with a smile, a marriage certificate, and a promise to take care of you. They hide in the fine print and the shadows of our own denial. Trust is a precious thing, but as Arthur had learned the hard way, verification is the armor that protects it. This story serves as a chilling reminder that evil often wears a familiar face. It teaches us that while love is unconditional, trust must be earned and maintained. It reminds us to listen to our instincts when the numbers do not add up, to protect the vulnerable even when it is uncomfortable, and to never underestimate the strength of a family united by truth. We must be vigilant, not just for ourselves, but for those who cannot fight for themselves. If this story touched your heart or opened your eyes to the silent battles many families face, please consider subscribing to our channel. Hit the like button and share this video with your friends and loved ones. Your support helps us bring more compelling, emotional, and meaningful stories to life every single day. We want to hear from you. What did you think of Arthur's plan? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your family? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments section below. We read them to understand the true feelings deep within your hearts. May everyone watching this video be blessed with good health, a life filled with joy, and peace in your homes every single day. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video. Goodbye.